Okay guys, so in this video we're going to talk about path variables, so let's get into it. Now, you may probably know that when you're reaching an URL of some sort, like slash user slash some name something something, you're actually hitting an endpoint on a server, which is something we've covered in previous videos. Now, the thing here is that in order for us to be a little bit more dynamic and be able to have URLs that can contain different types of information, because you don't want to have to duplicate a URL such as say slash users and then slash Anna or Bob or whoever, whatever user you want to get, you don't want to have redeclare that. That's where you get to use something that's called path variables, and that's what we're going to talk about, right? So a path variable is just a way for you to represent in a URL string that, hey, this value here can be anything. Just give me that value. It can be matched against anything. So let's just walk through the tests here first and foremost. So we have as you can see, all the tests are passing, so we know all this code is working. So if I do a get slash fail, we expect 404 because the server doesn't have that. And then we have this URL here, which basically says that, okay, if we do slash users, then we expect a 200, and then we should get a body. And then we assert that that body is a array, and we expect there to be 2 elements in that array. So let's look at our server. So I've created this little Express server here, and basically all it is a little variable here, like an object that contains our users. And what's going to happen is if I go to slash users, all I'm going to do is that I'm going to grab the values from this object here, which is Bob and Anna, and return that as an array. And that's it really. Now this is like just a static URL that leads to one single endpoint. There are no path variables here. But what happens if I want to get just one user? So then I have this next test here where I say, okay, slash users slash Bob, and then I expect the body.name that is going to be returned, right? That the body, I'm not expecting an array here. I'm expecting a user. Now this is a very common pattern that if you do something slash users or slash products or something like that, very often you will see that you'll get a return of an array. But if you do something slash users slash ID or some identifier, you should just get back the element that you are looking for, or the resource. So that's the thing that's happening here. So what's happening here is that I've said that, all right, go to slash users and then grab ID, like whatever. This can be anything. I can input whatever I want here, but this is my way of telling Express, extract this and give that a name. So what I'm doing here is that if there's a query and there's a name on that query, I'm going to return username, and then I'm going to return a object with the username property, and then I'm going to go to the users object and grab the ID parameter and the name of that object. So basically, if my ID, the thing that I'm setting here, is Bob, what's going to happen is I'm going to go to this object, I'm going to grab Bob, and I'm going to grab his name. That's it, and then I'm going to return that as one object. If there's no query parameter, we're going to talk about that in just a moment, but if there's none of that, I'm simply going to return the whole object. That's basically it. So the thing about this is that now I can create my next test, which is going to grab Anna. I mean, and this is going to hit the same endpoint. It's going to go to this endpoint, and it's going to grab Anna, since my ID, the parameter, the ID on the parameter params object is Anna. So I can also expand on this, and now I can do user slash Anna slash Bob. Now this is just like kind of as a demo thing. Don't do this in real production software, because like this is not usually the way that you would grab like multiple users and stuff of that nature. That's a little bit more of an advanced topic, but this is just for demo purposes. So now I need to go one further and do something like this thing here. So basically I have to do users ID and some other variable. And as you can see here, this is very similar to the code above, where we grab the ID and grab that user, and then we have some other variable and we grab that user. So all I'm going to want to show you here is that this is the syntax that you use in order to create path variables. But if we take a look at this line here, this will never be called because line 17 has the same URL pattern as this. If you look at this, so the way that I have structured it is that I have said slash users and the slash ID, and here I'm saying slash user some other variable. And if we look at this test here, the structure of /user/Bobs and /user/Anna, these are the same patterns, and that's something that's very important to know. So in Express there's a hierarchy, which means that the more specific you get with variables and so forth, the further like the match it has to match the pattern. Now Express cannot distinguish between these two, and because this line, or rather this callback for this URL pattern is above this pattern, this is always going to be fired. This will never ever be called because it has the same URL pattern. It doesn't matter that the name of the path variable is some other variable and this one is called ID. This will always be called because the pattern of the URL is exactly the same. So it's important to know that when you're declaring like multiple endpoints, I had to make this pattern something else in order for this to actually be called instead of this. So there's a hierarchy, if you will, to the callbacks, and that's why this is being matched, because the pattern here is /users path variable and then /path variable. In other words, it's a different structure than from this, and that's why this is working. And that's just keep that with you, right? So what's nice about, as I said earlier, what's nice about path variables is that you can kind of use them to express dynamic information on your URL. And it can be added anywhere. So I can do /users, and then I can just throw in a path variable and then another path variable, and then I can continue with a static part of the URL. So it's very dynamic, and there are tips and tricks to kind of know what's a good approach and what's a bad approach, but that's a little bit out of scope for this. The thing I want to kind of end on here and kind of look at is that I want just to make sure that you understand the separation between a path variable and a query parameter. So in this test here, you see that I have this thing, like I make a get call to users Anna Bob, and then I set a path variable of foo equal to 1. Now if we look at that code we saw earlier here, notice what's happening here now. So I'm going to the params and the ID because I have declared that the ID is going to be named, like the path. I've declared a variable here basically, and the same thing goes for some other variable. So these are found on the params object because they're part of the URL. But if I want to access whatever after the question mark, so this foo here, I need to go to the query object. That's where the query comes in, and the query object is never part of the URL. You never do something like this, like foo equal to something like that. You never ever do that. This is something that is always like the client can always declare query parameters, and you can always access them. You don't have to declare a pattern. So there's no matching going on here. I can add as many query parameters as I want, and it still will only really care about the path variable. So that's a good thing to remember. Path variables need to follow are going to be pattern matched, but query parameters will not. You can simply access them as you can see here, and the logic is fairly simple. All I'm doing is that if I have a foo, I reverse the order of the returning array of users. That's basically it. So that kind of, I hope, covers path variables. There's not really much to it. Like it's really just a way to kind of, as I said, declare dynamic information on the URL. Now, something I would like to leave you with is that there's a very common pattern where you will use path variables to declare what it is you want to get from an endpoint. As I said earlier, if I do /users, it's very common that you return an array of users. But if I do /users/ID, in this case the ID is Anna, then I expect to get back Anna, the resource Anna, all the data that I have, that the system has on Anna. And then I can use, say, a query parameter to declare that maybe I want to mutate that query a little bit. So if we look at maybe like just having a look at, let's see here, if name, where are we? There. Yeah, exactly. So we saw this earlier. So I have this weird thing where I say, okay, if request.query.name is truthy, then I just grab I create an object with the property username, extract the user that matches the ID, and just grab the name. And that's actually a very common pattern where you will use a path variable to declare what resource or what user in this case you want to access, and then you can use query parameters to kind of express other things. In this case, I'm just trying to express I don't want all of the Anna information. I don't want everything about Anna. I just want to grab the name and put that into an object and get that back. I could do many things here. I could say friends, or I could say last name, telephone number, whatever. Like, I can use query parameters as I want, right? So yeah, that's basically it. Just remember that you need to have a hierarchy. In other words, you have pattern matching on your path variables, and also remember a query or a query parameter is not the same thing as a path variable. There's a difference. And have a great day.